Comment devient-on écrivain ? Est-ce un choix, une nécessité ? Comment comprendre les origines de cette vocation et interpréter la trajectoire des auteurs, qu'ils soient écrivains, scénaristes, journalistes ou plumes politiques ? Je suis Aurélie Lévy et je vous propose dans mon podcast de découvrir l'autre versant de la vie d'auteur. La fabrique, ses secrets, ses questionnements, ses insécurités et ses moments de grâce. Cette semaine, dans l'émission ECRIRE, nous nous penchons sur l'écriture de films documentaires. Je profite de mon passage à New York pour m'entretenir avec le réalisateur indien SHAUNAK SEN, dont le film That Breathes&nbsp, diffusé sur HBO, lauréat du prix du meilleur documentaire à Sundance et à Cannes, est nominé aux Oscars. Dans cette interview exclusive depuis les États Unis, où se prépare la cérémonie des Oscars, le réalisateur nous livre son état d'esprit et ses secrets de fabrique. Parfois, les mythes tiennent d'histoires improbables. That Breathes, son film, est l'une de ces histoires. Alors que des légions d'oiseaux tombent du ciel de New Delhi et que la ville est en proie à des troubles sociaux, deux frères se lancent dans une course pour sauver l'une des victimes, un majestueux milan noir, un oiseau de proie essentiel à l'écosystème de leur ville. 3 ans de tournage, des rebondissements qui défient la fiction et un film plus que jamais d'actualité. Un récit qui incarne les enjeux de notre époque, l'écologie, la religion, la foi et aussi la guérison.
Once in a lifetime, you come across a story that pulls you in and takes a life of its own. It takes on a life of its own. All That Breathes is one such story, 3 years in the making, comprised of twists and turns that defy fiction and are more than ever relevant. A tale that embodies the issues of our time, ecology, religion, faith, and also healing. The pitch is original and very enticing. As legions of birds fall from New Delhi skies and the city smolders with social unrest, 2 brothers race to save one of the casualties, a majestic black kite, a bird of prey essential to their city's ecosystem. SHAUNAK SEN, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me.
Thank you.
What an incredible journey you've been on. You've been around the world. How do you feel right now? You must be exhausted.
I feel utterly discombobulated and, of course, a sense that I might be running on fumes, but the fumes are pleasant and it's all at the same time dreamy. And so, I mean, no complaints, but while in equal measure, I'm acknowledging the exhaustion of this entire thing, but it's also very dreamy.
Yeah, because, this is for European audiences and they might not know, but your film won a prize at Sundance and then at the Cannes Festival as Best Documentary, and it's nominated for the Oscars. So I assume you have a whole nation sort of behind you, wanting for you to win. And you're also quite young. I think you're, 24 now?
No, I'm 34. I have no idea why Google has randomly decided to age me at 24. I'm literally 10 to 11 years older than that. And it's just like it opens up a barrage of assumptions about me that are utterly and singularly untrue. So no, I'm sick.
It's kind of a relief, because I myself am a documentary filmmaker, and the fact that you were 24 was really driving me crazy. I was thinking
it would be annoying, as I mean, at 24 I had not even begun my PhD. I was still in film school. It was just like it would have been very annoying, and you would have rightly hated me had I been that age.
Because that first shot in the film, that's not a film student. You really worked that one out. And we're going to get into it and how you wrote the piece. So what did you study as in PhD on what?
My PhD was at the intersection of philosophy and cinema.
Western philosophy, Eastern philosophy?
I mean, whatever you draw sources from, but I mainly drew from Western philosophy.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. So let's get into it a little bit. Really, the film is an ecological, emotional, and socio-political piece on the city of Delhi through the eyes of this particular family and their relationship to this black kite. Now, I know, SHAUNAK, I know you've been asked this question a million times. You've been on junkets, but just for our friends here in France, will you tell me just a little bit about the genesis of the project before we get into structure and form?
Sure. So I was interested in doing something on the air of Delhi. When you live in Delhi, you're constantly thinking about or preoccupied with the air, and by which I mean the kind of gray opaque, tactile heaviness that you're surrounded by, especially in the winters in Delhi. And so I was interested in this texture or tone of life in the city. And I was also, other than that, philosophically interested in human non-human relationships. So essentially, that's how it began, as a kind of vague trifecta of air, birds, and humans. And from there, I would keep thinking about, whenever you look up at the kind of monochrome gray expanse with these tiny black dots floating in the sky, I would keep thinking about what happens when a bird falls off the sky. And when I started um, researching that, I got increasingly more and more interested in the work of the brothers, which is singular. And as you know, they've treated over 25,000 black kites in the last 15 years, working out of that tiny, grubby, industrial, cramped basement, in that
That
kind
they've
of.
that they've transformed into like a veterinarian hospital where they treat animals.
Yeah, into a clinic of sorts. And they work in the most unlikely of circumstances, and are, for the longest time, have made it because of their sheer will and love for the birds. But I wasn't interested in that aspect of the film. I did not want to make a sweet film about nice people doing good things. And I did not want to make a conventional nature doc. So I was interested in it because they're like philosophers. And that's how it and that place is just so inherently cinematic, it reminded me of Tarkovsky and Bellatar and that kind of East European cinematic world. So that's essentially how it began.
Yeah, you speak about Tarkovsky. It's really interesting because the pace of your film is very slow. It takes you really get into you get a real sense of the story only a third in, which is kind of a radical way to tell stories nowadays in such a fast-paced world where you're given the setup right away and the protagonists. In your story, the pace is very different. Was that deliberate?
100%. You see, when I started shooting, I was shooting like a regular verite handheld film. But soon I realized that material was too anxious or restless. And the world I was shooting was far more meditative and contemplative. And therefore, it had to, the film had to make audiences think, and we had to be braver. So after 6 months or 8 months of shooting handheld, I had to let go of that footage entirely and change styles and get on a tripod. And we moved towards more of a fiction film toolkit in terms of style, because we started using sliders and tracks and dollies and cranes and so on. And it became a different kind of a film grammar, which was needed, because, the idea was to slow things down and make people, you have to reward people for their patience. And there's a pleasure of watching itself. And I thought it'll be nice to make a film that kind of slows your heart rate down, while at the same time is conceptually very interesting and is aesthetically beautiful. So those sort of grammar changes came organically, and they evolved through the course of the 3 years.
Mm. 3 years is the time it took. It's a very long time. But then again, I've made movies that took longer to make because you're following your protagonist over time.
Yeah.
So I had a feeling when I was watching your film that there was a turning point at some point, something that you hadn't seen coming, and that it had somehow restructured the film. Did I imagine that, or did it actually happen?
What turning point specifically did you mean?
I got the feeling that you had started shooting the film with a particular intention in mind, and that at some point you realized it was about something else.
Well, the big shift that undoubtedly happened was what I mentioned right now, which was that formally I went from being handheld to just being this fluid, smooth cinematic style. I think what the triggers that changed the film it was always meant to be very philosophical, and I was interested in the profound ideas that the brothers often helped us access. But bringing in the cinematographer Ben Bernhardt from Germany, who shoots Victor Kosakowski's films, that because he brought in this language of, these slow pans and stuff, and that kind of articulated the core idea of the film, which is a kind of simultaneity or neighborliness or kinship between human and non-human life much better. Similarly, we cut the film, we edited the film in Copenhagen, Denmark, and there working with Charlotte, our editor who's cut films like Act of Killing or The Truffle Hunters before that, also was a big shift because she changed the tone into a more elliptical and more playful edit instead of a linear one. So those two things really, I think, changed it. So overall, the cinematographers like Ben and Riju and the editors like Charlotte and Vedant really changed matters.
And it's interesting that you should talk about your editor, because for people who don't know documentary filmmaking, part of the writing happens before, you have an intention, and then a lot of the writing happens in the editing room, because you have all this material. I was wondering, how many hours of footage did you have to work on?
I had about 300 hours of footage,
Wow.
but 300 very intentional hours,
Mm.
So and a lot of shooting of animals. So we were shooting for about 5 months simultaneous to the shoot in India. And then we went to Copenhagen with a sprawling 3.5 hour cut,
Mm-hmm.
which then Charlotte chiseled and sort of sculpted down.
So 300 hours is huge. So you had to make some choices. But in terms of writing, I think the challenge I feel is having a wide range of issues to portray. And this is really the case in your movie. In your case, you have the birds, the brothers, the family issues, the political turmoil in Delhi, particularly for the Muslim family. And I feel like you found a way to have them all there.
Right. So the thing is that I realized when we began, the film was mainly ecological and philosophical, but the social world outside was becoming more and more disruptive and pregnant, because what happened was that Delhi was going through just such a turbulent time that there was a temptation to point the camera streetwards. And I eventually figured that what would be the right form is that you have the outside world kind of leaking in, or you have resonances of the outside world. So, for instance, your character goes to the balcony and you hear the murmurs of a distant protesting crowd, or a character is looking at the video of a violence and you only hear the audio and not the video. So that kind of thing, I think, where the political is only obliquely and tangentially sensed, where you sense the political instead of being, hammered in the head and being told what it is, I think works better. And also,
it's like a breeze that seeps through the film.
It is like a breeze, I think, that sort of flits in and out. And so what I did was that I had a diary full of ideas that I wanted to get at somehow, because I know you're interested in writing and you write. So I'm also interested in writing. I also have an academic background, and I spent a lot of my time writing. So I'm interested in the conversion of ideas into words or concepts into images. And I had a diary full of conceptual things that I was interested in, and I would keep trying to tweak the conversations with the brothers or what we were getting to push them towards where we were heading towards in terms of cinematically. So writing was a very essential part of the film.
And you were talking about the brothers. Often you'll have the camera pointed at one brother while the other one is talking. So the other one is talking, but he's not the one the camera is actually capturing, which also is interesting. Was that deliberate as well? Because that's also part of writing. It's visual writing. I was wondering if it was
100%. All of it. Look, the film is very intentional because you see in terms of the form, what happened is that it's a tiny space where the same set of actions keep getting choreographed happening, repeating themselves every day. So we could choreograph or anticipate the camera movement. So we know that there's a man who carries boxes every day and comes to a tiny basement where they get treated, and then they get taken to the enclosures on the terrace. So it means that over 3 years, we could figure out exactly how we're shooting and so on. And also in terms of a lot of the film, I was very conscious of what moves were taking place emotionally, conceptually, philosophically. So what I'm trying to say is that we were moving towards a space that was more like a creative treatment of actuality than a verite doc,
Yeah.
which inherent to which is the act of authorial writing. And that was definitely present.
But my dear, you sound like you know exactly what you're talking about, but I'm sure you made some mistakes. And I'm also interested in the mistakes you made and what you learned from them and what mistakes you won't be making on your next film. Because that's
Well,
also,
everything that I'm saying right now, if it sounds like I'm fairly certain of everything, is because I've gone through the relentless treadmill of non-stop conversations about the film, and I speak ad infinitum and ad nauseum about the film. So of course it feels like now it's all suffused with certainty. But no, through the making of the film, the thing is that you're always the making of the film is a bit of a fever dream, right? It's
Hmm.
you jumped off a cliff and you're in free fall, and then you're just like groping about to find some kind of stability. And for us, the stability just became the language of the camera, which is these slow pans. And you start seeing the world through the demon eyes of the film. And your own life becomes kind of raw material for the film and vice versa. And that becomes the kind of life raft or the thing that anchors you
Hmm.
through. So it's not so much a question of mistakes, because of course there are mistakes galore, but those are not relevant, because what you're doing is you're trying to find the sharpest vocabulary to communicate what you're trying to say, and everything else gets thrown out anyway. So that's the process. Like mistakes are the, like, writing is rewriting. Drafts are the way to go. So I don't couch them as mistakes, therefore.
So you talked about philosophy, um, but there's also a very spiritual element to your film. I find that at the end it is a film about healing, healing the earth, healing our system, healing our relationship, healing our soul. What did making this film heal in you, for you? It's a very personal question, but I'm really intrigued to know.
Well, firstly, you're right. It is spiritual because the brothers' work is underwritten by a non-Western cosmology of spiritual thought coming from their mother and so on, and which had to, it's also the world of folklore and jinns and other kinds of belief systems, which one has to respect because it forms a part of their of what drives them every day in their work. For me, I think what one takes away is a kind of the value of patience and slowness and listening to the tiny voices in your head, and not giving in. And if something feels magical, to know that, whatever you're enchanted by, the world will also be enchanted by. In terms of healing, I don't know. The jury's still out on it because I had a big personal loss through the making of the film. I suddenly lost my father very
Oh, I'm
abrupt
so
in
sorry.
the middle of the film, and it was, of course, very, very, very difficult. And so, I mean, I don't know if I've healed from it, but the film definitely is arguably the most special. I mean, I can't imagine what will top it because, it took so much from me, but it also became a life raft to navigate the stormy seas of like a lot of personal loss and so on. So I don't know if I'd say that the film has healed a lot, but it definitely is part of the process of healing for sure.
I'm so sorry to hear about your father. What a what a journey you've been on.
Yeah, so it's discombobulating because big personal loss, traveling immediately for the film, going back, and then just being um essentially on the road for the longest time. So of course the general feeling is that and not just me, like other people in the film had profound losses as well. And you feel like you've won a lot, but you've also lost a lot.
Yeah, I understand. You know, among all the questions people have asked you abroad, what is the biggest you feel misconception about India from what people have asked you?
I hate it when people, for this film, I was shooting their life and their neighborhood, which is a certain part of Delhi.
Yeah.
Delhi is an enormous city with 30 million people, and that bit is one aspect of it. If I'm right now talking out of a big house in Hollywood Hills, And I don't make the mistake of imagining that the entirety of America is like this and as plush. So I wish the West would also allow some complexity and plurality and, um, just like difference in India. Like there's all kinds. And I just hate it when people come with really trite preconceived notions
Mm.
about the country.
What were they? Was there one in particular? I'm curious. So that
Well,
we
there
can
were,
debunk it, actually.
I mean, your people are either orientalizing and exalting the spiritual thought to a point where it's just a cliche,
Mm.
or there's a lot of focus on. I mean, why I was excited also in making the film is that it's always felt that the global south or like countries like India have to carry the burden of the social, and they have to be about uh, poverty or money or squalor or those kinds of things, whereas it's almost like our European counterparts dealt with the uh, sexy existential questions of who we are and what we do. And I've always felt like, why should that be why should the Russians and the French and the Germans alone deal with the existential questions, whereas we get to deal with the social? So the fact that the characters are philosophers are very crucial, is a very crucial thing in terms of uh, explaining a rich interiority to the characters.
That's a very interesting answer. Unfortunately, we don't have that much time because you're more solicited than ever. The Oscars are arriving, and I hope we can continue this conversation when you come to France at some point, and
For sure.
properly sit down and talk
For
about
sure.
all that. I guess my last question is, you've been on a gazillion junkets. Everybody's asked you a million questions. What is the one question you really want to answer and no one's asked you?
Well, I can't think of a question that anybody has not asked me, but I like talking about, I get excited now when people talk about pure form, when somebody really gets into the thickets in terms of, the weeds of particular pan shots or what it means for the camera to pan for these long durations. I like that's my interest right now. Like, or when there's conversations about the aesthetics in specific grounded ways, I like that.
Mm.
But I
And
don't have a satisfactory answer to give in terms of what as the film. Well, nobody asks me about the relationship with characters because it's a complex relationship, right? So those kinds of things, I suppose. But no, nothing comes to mind in terms
I
of.
was about to ask because you've lived with these guys and this family and you were there, and there's always a point when you're writing where you're also manipulating a little bit because I mean you're present but you're also constructing your own story, and so there's that moment when both collide. It's a very subtle thing, actually. I've come across these situations as a filmmaker myself. Was that the case? Did you
Well, the
sense it
thing
at
to
some
talk
point?
about is, of course, because you're basically shooting somebody for 3 years and then telling a 90-minute story about their life. So you're bound to be leaving a lot out, bound to be, pushing life under the aegis of a narrative arc. So, of course, there's manipulation that somewhat aesthetic manipulation and dramaturgical manipulation that is inherent to it. But more than that, I think the thing to talk about is that the documentary enterprise is inherently violent in some respects because you take something from people's lives and it's inherently violent from the filmmaker to the subjects and the subjects to the filmmakers. Actually, it's both ways around because, it's like after some points, subjects will have demands. And it's a dense relationship where you love the characters, but you're also sick of them and they love you and they're sick of you. So, and it's a complex case by case sort of a scenario where it's uppy, downy, and dense, and there's no straightforward answer for it. And we have to embrace the complexity of this.
You did an amazing job juggling all these things. It's a remarkable movie in form and content. I really wish you all the best, and I realize that it has impacted your life in a much greater way than most people realize. Yeah, I hope we will see many more of your films. And I thank you for
Thank
taking
you.
the time to
Thank you
speak
so much.
with
This is
me.
a very enjoyable conversation. Thank you.